You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Good. We are under tornado watch here in the Southeast. But as I've always said, as a warrior, I only have one life to give. And if I'm going to give that life, I give it to this podcast.
Well, we appreciate your service and your sacrifice, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. But if it does, I guess, we'll have a recording and we can use that in posterior or some sort of in memoriam when they roll the Identity and Access Management Awards for, 2021.
Yeah. In other words, it was nice knowing you.
We had a good run, Liz is like, I think we've known each other for like five plus years at this point, and the podcast has been going for about close to a year and a half or so. We're on episode. So this is recording, I think, what will end up being episode number 86 all time for us.
Yeah, we've had some great ones. And what came to mind, I've been seeing a lot of people giving a shout out to March being, I think it's national, maybe it's International Women's Month, which I think is really cool. And just a shout out to our past guest, Kay Chopard from Women in Identity. You and I have joined that organization. It's free to join, womeninidentity.org for anybody who's interested.
Yep, we've had a lot of great guests. We've had Chrissy Safi from our side over here, and Katie Stevens and Julie Smith. I mean, just a whole bunch of stuff. Eve Mailer. I mean, a lot of great folks. We've been very lucky to have them on the show. So very appreciative for that. And it's a good thing you mentioned different days, because we've got Identity Management Day coming up. I know we've been talking about it the last few podcasts, but it's April 13th. And it's something that the Identity Defined Security Alliance has been putting together. And this is the inaugural year. And if you want to find out more about that, how you can contribute, how you can nominate your favorite podcast host or other folks who might be equally worthy for Evangelist of the Year or Organization of the Year, you can visit identitymanagementday.org for more information.
Selfless plug.
Selfless. More plug. If you Google Identity at the Center, we are the top 8 links on Google.
I always tell people we're definitely top 10 IAM podcasts, but then again, I doubt there are 10 IAM podcasts in existence. So
it is a relatively low bar. Yeah.
I feel safe in that one.
Yeah, I feel safe with it too. We do what we do, and there's a lot of good shows out there. I encourage you to check them out. Things like Identity Unlocked with our friend Vittorio. And I'm sure there's others out there that make a lot of sense for folks. But yeah, we've been doing this for a while, and hopefully we'll keep the ball rolling. With a lot of that shameless promotion out of the way, why don't we get to today's topic? And I think what we're thinking today is that we really want to kind of talk around the business and identity and access management. So how does the business interact with an IAM program and teams involved, and kind of vice versa? And to that, we're also setting a new show record where we're actually going to have 2 guests on with us today. So I would first want to welcome Pierce Chakraborty. He's a fellow colleague of ours here at Protiviti's digital identity practice. Welcome, Pierce.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, thanks for joining us. And we've also got Bryan Macleod. He's the global head of identity and access management for a financial institution. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we've got a traditional first question that we like to ask all of our guests, and we're going to go a little bit round robin here since we've got both of you. And we'll start with Pierce. Pierce, how did you get into the IAM space? Is it something that you chose, or did you choose it?
So I think it chose me more than I chose it, for full transparency. I started off my career being a very hardcore engineer, going through and playing with a lot of systems. As I evolved and got more on the business side, I got introduced to identity through compliance and all the different nuances that it involves and how it touches everything, right? Identity at the center to me also means how identity is the center of the business as well. So that really intrigued me. And once I got in, man, I've just kind of been in it and just been rolling with the punches for it and watching it evolve. And it's been probably like no other industry I've ever been in.
How about you, Bryan? Is it something that you chose, or did you choose it?
Kind of both. I like to joke that I was dragged in kicking and screaming. But no, it was one of those in my previous life of running data centers and server farms and AD environments. The first time I saw an identity and access management tool, I'm like, I would have killed for something like that back in the day, to be able to track who has access to what and why, and all the different levels. So I kind of always kept my feet in that pool, and then eventually, when it became an obvious standalone component, I really focused on that and took control of those areas where I was allowed to.
One of my perspectives on IAM and why I think IAM is so cool, and I worked in different areas of IT, from the back room technology up to ERP systems, but I think that IAM really requires an understanding and a feel for the business more than almost any other area of IT, except for maybe ERP, where you're really entrenched in how the business works. But I wanted to know, do you kind of feel the same way, Bryan? And give us a little bit of perspective on how you think IAM empowers the business, helps the business run more efficiently, more effectively, and whatever other touch points you see.
I agree. Even devoid of a tool, the manual efforts to do access management, we have to know so much about so many different systems across so many different departments in the business that we're usually that single point where other groups come to us and ask us questions that on the surface really shouldn't be our responsibility. But because we have had to accumulate and craft that broad knowledge in order to do our jobs, we become a resource for other groups. But that only helps, I think, reinforce the idea that, we are here to support the business. Without the business, there wouldn't really necessarily be a need for us. But it means that we have to keep that in mind, that yes, we need to approach things with security in mind, but we also have to enable people to do their job and do it with as few roadblocks in their way as possible. So that's actually kind of my attitude that I've always approached to information security as a whole. It's like, let's find a solution that actually provides a benefit rather than just a hurdle for people to get over.
Yeah, so I really feel like IAM has a positive or potentially negative impact on the business if it's not done well. I'm wondering about the reverse, and then I'll kick it over to Pierce. But Bryan, maybe you can also talk about, how does the business empower IAM? How does the business make IAM either a success or a flop?
The business, hopefully we've fostered some relationships along the way. You're really only going to succeed in IAM if you do get their support from the top down. As in most information security, if you're trying to push something from the bottom up, it's going to struggle. Hopefully we've leveraged ourselves to have a good relationship and have trust in the people that you work with, so that when we start talking about how we can help the business, that they will be our partners and they will say, well, yeah, let's do this together. What do you need from us? What information do you need? What resources can we help you get? So that it's a cohesive two-way communication, and not just, hey, we're going to implement this and you're going to like it whether you want it or not.
Yeah, I've got a perspective on that as well. And kind of two of the ideas that come to mind for me are, like you, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I've kind of seen the evolution where, in my beginning days of insecurity and in IAM, where the quote unquote smart business executive looked at security as like, oh, it's FUD, it's overhead. And probably I was more industry specific, right? I wasn't in financial services at the time, but even then it was kind of like, security is kind of an additional cost. I don't think anybody thinks that anymore, right? I think everybody realizes that it's a dangerous world we live in. So that was point number one on the business, which I think is that now executives kind of get it and they've realized the importance. And when you talk about an IAM program, it's like, oh my gosh, here's the security guy trying to get more money. It's more than that. Number two, I think even kind of at the grassroots level, when you're trying to implement something like role-based access control, or it can be as simple as just access requests, it really requires that the business kind of buy in and participate and be kind of, quote unquote, to use a modern phrase, be present. They've got to think it's important, these roles that they're building. They've got to own these roles, and they've got to really say IAM is important. IT can't push role-based controls on the business, right? The business has to own it, or it's a two-way street. What do you think of that?
Oh, you hit the nail on the head with the ownership. I think anyone who gets into the IAM world learns quickly that your technical and business owners don't necessarily know what you expected them to know. So it's usually an effort of discovery on both parts, but especially getting into role-based access, that definitely has to flow from the business owner down. I think we've all been in those environments where, these 32 people all have the exact same title and they report to the same person, but their roles are not the same. So we've got to work with those businesses to find a way to categorize them more logically so that we can apply role-based access control and not have it be, the one size fits all. And then the auditors come in and say, oh, this is not good. Why do these people have all this access?
So I'd like to get Pierce's and Jeff's perspective. Pierce, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I think you guys hit the nail on the head. And Bryan and I spent the majority of the last year working on buy-in, right? We spent a decent amount of time getting the business to see the value in identity. And I think a lot of that comes down to security versus functionality, right? Where the most common thing is, see, as the business, we don't want to necessarily stop them from doing their job, but we're just trying to protect them while they do their job. And as times kind of continued, that whole walking that line, right, between the two, I think one thing that we've seen is that that's been the biggest challenge, that we just want to make sure that we're socializing correctly across the enterprise, right? And when you look at the different components within IAM, when you look at PAM, and when you look at the nuances that come in with doing access management, access control, like RBAC, you learn that all these new methodologies and everything that's coming out, they're changing the way of life, right? You're evolving the way of life for end users and administrators, and getting the business to buy in and see it and say, I see. So you're doing this new methodology, and yes, my way of life is changing, but at the end of the day, you're making me be able to do my job faster, better, and more accurately while being protected. That's a win. And that story, I think as practitioners, we need to do a better job of explaining that to the business overall.
I think you guys hit it all pretty much right on the head. I see it as a very symbiotic relationship between the business and IT in general, but we're talking about IAM. There's a lot of interplay between an IAM program and the business that they are supporting. We see a lot of issues where the business is in charge of doing an access review, for example, and they end up rubber stamping it because they have no idea what they're approving, right? It's some gobbledygook IT speak coming out of, a SQL database somewhere that is not, friendly unless you really know what you're looking at. And it goes to a manager somewhere who's like, sure, looks okay to me. I don't want to break anything if I say no. So they kind of leave it in place. I think that symbiosis that takes place between the business and IAM is that, yes, it's the business's data. They should be responsible for it. They should drive how the processes should be working to make sure that it's meeting their needs. But it's also on the IAM program to provide them with enough information to make educated decisions, right? Give them the tools to be successful in their role, whether it's an approver or if they're making a request for access, right? Or if they're onboarding or offboarding, any of the things that are happening from an IAM perspective. And the other thing too is you have to be really smart about the resources, whether it's time, money, people. Nobody has unlimited of any of those things. And you're usually constrained by at least one or two, or maybe even all three of those things. So you want to make sure that you don't waste people's time, don't overpromise and underdeliver. You take advantage of SMEs when you need them and you free them up when you don't. You don't try and automate the entire world, automate the stuff that makes sense. And, let the rest kind of play out. Don't solve a 1% problem and have that hold up progress when you could be doing a whole lot more for, 80% of the issues that are out there. And I think at the end of the day, technology is really a small part of IAM. It is mostly business process and the relationships and the people around it. The technology supports those things that are out there. And I think that leads to, some of the challenges maybe that we've seen out there from the business, and it could be functionality, it could be user experience, it could be security. And sometimes, those are in opposite directions and forces that are pushing each other. And I'm curious, Bryan, from a challenge perspective, what are some of the challenges that you've seen from the business when it comes to integrating an IAM program, whether it's, specific process maybe, or specific technology that's associated with that, that you've come across?
The biggest, I think, hurdle is getting the time from these other people. I mean, they're just as busy as we are. And then when you get their time, making sure they're fully engaged with you. And it's not just I'll meet with you to get this over with. So I try to upload or prepare people to know that there's a lot of heavy lifting involved with this up front. But after we get all of these parameters established, then things become much easier. Things will flow. You'll actually realize the true benefit of this environment. But it's not just an easy plug and play and you're done. So, working with the business, making sure they understand what our goals are, and that goal should be to make their life easier ultimately, because when their life is easier, my life is easier. But getting the information you need in order to truly deploy their application or their system in the tool, and not have to go back multiple times to get extra information that they just didn't think was important. So I always put that on both of our shoulders, that, well, I may not have communicated well enough that we need everything, but then sometimes we've learned a few hard lessons where some people are very protective of their systems and they're afraid to tell you everything because they don't know what you're really going to do. So again, you've got to try to develop those relationships. I've also learned sometimes those are not handled well over email. You've got to literally get in that meeting and talk with them. I think probably a lot of people have these relationships where the email exchanges are very terse and almost combative, and yet you get in a meeting and everyone's so happy to see each other and more than happy to help. So, you try and leverage what you can to get the job done.
It's hard to convey tone in an email, right? I mean, I think emoticons maybe have helped. I'm a big fan of animated GIFs and things like that to carry on conversations. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to make sure that you recognize time as a value for people. And you said it, very well, Bryan, at least I think, is not, people are busy. You're not the only one that has things that, that has to get done, right? They're not at your beck and call typically. So you got to be smart with that time. Do you ever come across issues when it comes to, business processes, and then sometimes how that might affect configuration in a product versus customization, which might, take you down a rabbit hole that maybe you don't want to go down to from a technical perspective?
Oh, all the time. As I alluded to earlier, it's amazing when you start digging these trenches and, trying to lay your foundation, that the people you thought knew the systems don't know the systems. So you'll start developing a process, and based on all your information, it should be a simple ABC and you're done. And then somewhere along the way, there's a right-hand turn that happens that you weren't expecting. And now there's a whole new group involved in this process that you thought was a single source. So you try to leverage, okay, what do you know, and how does that flow into this? And does it flow from anything else, or does your effort impact other things too? So maybe you can, get a benefit by leveraging all of these pieces together to I guess, put in your quiver for later use. But yeah, business processes are never as simple and quick and easy as you might think they will be.
Do you ever run into any challenges from an ownership perspective? I think this concept of the business owning the data is sometimes foreign to some of the clients that at least that we've worked with in the past. It's not hard and fast rule, but there's a lot of times where the business may kind of toss things over the IT wall and say, well, you figure it out. What are some of the challenges you've seen around that and some of the ways that you've approached it?
The usual access management. Well, don't you know everything? Can't you decide? It's like, well, no, we're not here to make the decisions based on our feelings of the day. We have hard and fast, rules and parameters that we use. And that's always shown. Sometimes when we're talking to these business owners, and we'll ask them some of those, technical questions, and they'll look at us with the blank stare, and and tell me basically, I'll have to get back with you on that one. So then you can maybe, depends on the person, you can let them go do their legwork, or more appropriately, you probably should say, well, let's go find that person and talk to them together, because it's better to get that information firsthand rather than have someone translate it to you and it's completely wrong by the time you get it. So yeah, it's trust but verify, I guess, is a good approach.
Yeah, I think ownership can be a scary thing, especially if you don't really know what you're signing up for. And there might be a hesitancy, right, to say, okay, yeah, I'll own it. And only the brave will go there without doing their due diligence. Pierce, what are some of your thoughts when it comes to challenges that an IAM program might get from the business?
I think, Bryan, this might hit a little close to home, but from the work that we've been doing, right, a lot of the challenges all seem to be level setting resource, right? Level setting expectations and resource bandwidth, and understanding that, hey, an IAM project is not an assessment, right? It's not going to be done, it's not going to be fixed within 2 days or 3 days. An IAM implementation or an IAM project, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of layers, and we need adequate time and investment. And it's a heavy lift up front, but the reward is there at the end of the tunnel. And I believe that most people, when they get pulled in for a request, right, everyone has a day job and everyone has stuff they have to do. And a lot of times these projects come in and out, and people say, oh, that's great, let me go do them. And then they say, oh, I'm sick of doing them. And it's fair, because their stuff is piling on from their day job. And I think balancing that out and understanding that, look, yeah, the first few weeks is not going to be easy, and there's going to be a lot of work to do, a lot of discussion, and a lot of challenging the norm, right? That's what identity seems to be coming and heading towards for as it innovates. But having that gap of understanding constraints, understanding, hey, let's all go, let's lift this giant boulder up. And once we lift it, it will be a huge sigh of relief for the program overall. I think that's been the main focus that I personally have seen for several number of years, and it's been very consistent. And it's a harder problem to fix than most people realize.
It's funny you use the boulder analogy. I think of the boulder getting picked up, and I think of, okay, what are all the things that are crawling underneath that that we didn't know about, right? I'm curious, Pierce, your thoughts, and then back to Bryan, and we'll go to Jim. Is there's an expectation, I think, that, when you come into an organization, whether it's consulting or as an IAM program manager or just any part of the IAM chain, is that you're going to have all the answers, and you're going to have them right away, and you're going to know everything and how to solve every single problem. And I don't think that's a realistic expectation. And I'm curious as to, my thought process is when we're talking with folks around IAM, it's okay, we're going to start putting questions out there, and we may not have the answers, or they may not be readily apparent, but that's okay, right? We need to start understanding what we don't understand to be able to fix those types of things. And I'm curious if that's something that you guys have seen as well in your experiences. Maybe Pierce, we'll start with you and then go to Bryan.
Yeah, so I'll put it this way. I don't think Elon Musk even has all the answers. And the reason why I'm saying that is, if you look at the questions and the landscape, and if you remember, the thing I said earlier was that identity specifically is such a unique beast because it's in the heart of so much that the business does without even realizing that it is in the back end. It's one of those things where having identity be at the position it is, people expect you to know, hey, how does SAP work? How does ServiceNow work? How does an ERP work? How does all of this plan in? How does it play in identity? And very rarely can one person actually ever answer all that. They might be able to answer at a very high level, but going deeper, there needs to be a ton of collaboration and a ton of people, and it takes an army, right, to build an empire for this. And has been my experience, is that you need to collaborate to get the answers for this. And one single source, the other problem with that is, if it's one person giving you all the answers, you're going with one person's view, which doesn't tend to usually end well.
It's not as diversified. Bryan, what about yourself?
Well, first of all, I think I need to rethink this relationship with Pierce, because I was under the assumption he did know everything. No, so all kidding aside, that's true. It's yeah, I think Pierce is right. There's a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of components that have to go together, and as we alluded to before, your resource owners probably don't know everything that you had hoped they would know. So developing those relationships where you can discover the information together and leverage it is good. But I also think it's important that you define small elements for success rather than having the big, end result always hanging over your head, so that you can show there's progress, there's success, and we're building on that success as we go. If you only see the end of the tunnel, you're going to miss all of those important steps along the way.
And Jeff, I think you when you went through this question, you kind of broke it into three parts. There was the ownership of IAM, the customization versus configuration, and what I would call user experience versus security. So let me kind of just give my elevator pitch on each one. So when it comes to ownership, my perspective is that it's the IAM program's responsibility to put a good process and a good set of tools in place, but it's the business's responsibility to decide who gets access to what. I think we as IT professionals want to step up and, fill the void. But I think we have to be careful not to step into the role of, okay, we'll decide who gets access to what. And then that leaves the business kind of not responsible if something happens, right? If the wrong person has the wrong access. Really, it's got to be in the right hands for the decision to be made. And IT's role is to then, put it in a context so that the right decision can be made for the person not rubber stamping access, and that the provisioning of that access happens. So that's my perspective on that one. In terms of customization versus configuration, my perspective is like with ERP, and I did ERP before I got into the IAM space, but like with ERP, let me give my ERP example. You go and buy SAP and they've got a best practice for creating a purchase order. And you say, well, that's not how we do purchase orders. We do purchase orders in this 26-step process. We're going to make SAP do purchase orders in this 26-step process. Can you do it? Maybe, maybe not. Let's say you can. You still wasted, in my opinion, a whole lot of effort, a whole lot of time customizing the purchase order process, which, you bought SAP because they have a way of doing it. And look, every time you make a customization decision like that, it has tentacles. Now, maybe in the end, you did make the right decision to go custom. That's a business decision in the moment. But if you make that decision too many times, you wasted your money going out and buying a software package. And at the end of the day, you're going to probably wind up spending a whole lot more money every time you need to upgrade that software, which is going to happen at least every 2 years. The third thing that you talked about was user experience versus security. And so this is kind of the age-old balance of security and user experience. Every time you improve the user experience, you drop security. Every time you improve security, the user experience gets worse. And that's the old paradigm, I think. And it's still a valuable way to think about things, but there are a lot of improvements that have taken place within our industry where some new features, things like passwordless authentication, that actually improves security because now you're forcing the route of a trusted device being used instead of a password, which we know passwords stink, right? So now it's easier for me to log in because all I have to do is push a button on my phone. But it's also more secure because it's not relying on some stupid password that could end up in a leak. Another example would be the institution of risk in identity governance process, identity governance and administration. So whether it's using risk as a vector to determine how many people need to approve, or if an access request even needs to be approved at all. Jeff and I love to use this example of, okay, well, if a role gives you access to read the lunch menu, who cares? Just, don't even require it being approved. And that's kind of a trivial example, but, take it up a level, right? Is there a point, some types of access, some levels of access where if it's being requested by somebody who works for your company, the manager of the employee, that doesn't really even need to be approved. Some cases, the answer is yes. Other cases, you might be able to say no. Now, what's the benefit of that? The benefit is that you start getting away from that person who has a whole bunch of people reporting to them getting overwhelmed with their approving access, 25 times a day, and they get into rubber stamping just because of what we call access fatigue. So those are kind of my thoughts where, and obviously when it gets to those things like risk and password, those are, level 2, level 3 features within the IAM space. But I think it's starting to break away from that paradigm that you're choosing security or user experience. There are actually opportunities where you can improve them both. So I wanted to see if any of you guys have any comments on anything I just said.
Yeah, you kind of hit on part of that in your customization configuration area. I think the view is sometimes we're an assembly line. So give me the information, I'll crank this out. Give me the information, I'll crank this out. We should be able to take a step back and say, is that the best way to do this? I think we could maybe streamline this or come up with a better way that benefits everyone. So hopefully your other experience you've gathered over your lifetime in IT and IAM would help you recognize some of those areas where you can have a gain before you even put it into place in your tool.
One other area I wanted to get into is really because we've talked about the impact of the business, how IAM can impact the business, and how business can impact IAM. We talked a little bit about how to get there. I feel like, one of the things that we do when we develop our IAM strategy, everybody's looking to get buy-in. We want to have a strategy that has buy-in. My perspective on gathering buy-in is about bringing people to the table. Hearing what they have to say. I'm not afraid to ask people, how do you think this can be done better? Maybe I'm the identity management subject matter expert who's at the table. Maybe I know what is considered quote unquote best practice, but you may have something to say. Obviously, you've been thinking about this problem too. What are your ideas for solving the problem? Bryan, I'll throw it to you. How do you think the IAM team can partner better with the business overall? And what are your thoughts in terms of that engagement of the business?
It is about partnership. And that implies to me that you can ask questions and actually listen to what the answers are. Your good question, what are your pain points? Is there anything we're doing here that we can make your life easier? Are we so focused on that end result that we're missing part of your other job duties that, we could accommodate if only we knew about them. So getting good dialogue, sometimes even just having a chat and not even talking about IAM at all is kind of helpful. Getting a better idea of what do you really do? I don't have a clue what you do in your role on a daily basis. All I know is how we've been discussing it in terms of the deployment on the tool. So tell me about your role. Tell me about all the things you do and all the people you interact with. Sometimes you can gather some really good information that way, and it may not help you directly with that person and that task, but you may get some information that helps you with someone else down the road.
Hey, Pierce, what about you? What are your thoughts in this area about, building buy-in and engaging with the rest of the business?
Just going on what you and Bryan said, I can't emphasize that enough. Bryan, especially when you look at where you and I were in 2019, right before we got the buy-in that we got, how much of a hurdle, right, we had to get through and what we had to dig through, and how much easier it got once we got the business to align and say, yeah, you know what, this makes sense. Let's do it. We see it. And then they saw value, right? Without collaborating to that extent and being transparent with the business, I think identity programs will fail. I think they're one of the most crucial things to building a sustainable program that people will also adopt and like, which is huge, right? Because you don't want to design something and everyone say, hey, this sucks, we don't want it, then rip it out in a year or 2 years. And that happens. I think having that layer of transparency and those honest and blunt conversations and collaborating with the business and realistically showing them what your vision is and seeing, do they hate it? Getting that kind of blunt feedback is the most healthy thing you can do to actually build out an IAM program.
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity to leverage relationships, right? Part of being a good IAM program manager or team member is making relationships with the business, with counterparts, building trust with those organizations and with your own team, that when you say something's going to get done, it's going to get done, right? And that you're not going to leave someone out there that's hanging. So I think that's an important part too, is the relationship aspect of it, and being able to leverage hopefully things that you've built up. And sometimes it's a little bit tougher if you're new to the organization, you're walking in, you're going to have to maybe basically start from zero. Or if you've been there for a while, you might have our relationships. You might have some maybe not so great relationships because previous projects might not have gone as well. But it's okay to get smarter. It's okay to get better. So I think that's an area that is also kind of ripe for exploiting, where it makes appropriate. I know we've been running a little bit long here, but I want to make sure that we have time to kind of give kind of last thoughts or final thoughts before we close it out for this week. Bryan, why don't you let us know, is there anything that you think that you can add to the conversation that people can kind of chew on out there?
I mean, being identity professionals, I think we all understand the importance of this space, but not everyone else quite understands that. And then sometimes we run under that guise of information security as a whole, and everyone's tired of hearing the fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor. So we have to communicate clearly and don't forget to accent the benefits that we're working towards, that this is to help everyone on both sides of this coin, not just, we're doing it for us and you guys, you don't have his choice. So communication, you can never talk too much about fostering good communication.
I like that. How about you, Pierce?
I completely agree with what Bryan said. It's just, at the end of the day, we're empowering the business. And I think when you take your first IT course, when you read your first IT book, you'll read IT is about empowering the end users. And for a lot of the work we do, that's the business. And understanding how we can help them, leverage them, but also protect them, right, from all the bad things that make the front headlines. That's the balancing act that we will continue to evolve. And hopefully we can get to a point where everyone will see, oh, hey, this IAM project is actually making my life easier. Simple example, I don't have to remember passwords. I don't need to request for roles. Oh, compliance, it's all system generated, no more Excel spreadsheets. Yay. So I think Bryan likes that example the best, but it correlates at the end of the day to all that umbrella. And I think as we go forward, it's important not to lose sight of that.
Jim, how about yourself? Any last thoughts here before we close it out for the week?
Last thoughts. I know Bryan is a huge Avengers fan. I'm going to ask everybody to go around the room and say which Avenger they would like to be. I'll start and go with Thor. I think kicking ass with a hammer would be pretty cool. And I've got kind of longish hair myself, so I'm going to go with Thor. What about you, Bryan?
Well, I'm not so lofty to consider myself a god, so I'll just stick with Captain America. Now, I always liked Captain America's very simple approach to life and how he always seems to get things done.
How about you, Pierce?
I would go with the Winter Soldier, man. With Bucky Barnes, and not saying I'm Bryan's sidekick, although I don't know what Bryan thinks about that statement, but I love Bucky's story and his different dimensions to his character. Huge fan of that.
I thought you would have picked Wanda.
No, honestly, I was debating that, but yeah.
Scarlet Witch is all powerful. Jim, this might be one of the best questions I think that's been asked on the show. And of course, it has nothing to do with IAM. I'm going to have to go with Iron Man because I am a huge gadget freak. So I think having all the toys and whistles and, things like that would probably be pretty appealing. Plus, you can say you're the guy who beat Thanos, which that's not bad. Good question, Jim.
Thank you. And hey, last thing from me is everybody, as I always do, open to connecting on LinkedIn. So please send myself a connection, send Jeff a connection. Pierce and Bryan, are you guys open to connections on LinkedIn from our listeners?
Yes, sure.
Yep.
Great. Well, with that, I think that's a good spot that we can leave it for this week. I will have links in the show notes to all of our LinkedIn profiles to make it easy to connect. Don't forget, Identity Management Day 2021 is April 13th. And you can also visit the show at identityatthecenter.com. We're on Twitter at IDAC Podcasts. And with that, we're going to go ahead and leave it. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you all in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.